Hi, my name is Sierra Luddington, and my presentation is about the Olympics as a stage for international politics, specifically as this pertains to the United States involvement. Above are two images from the 1936 Berlin Games, also called the Nazi Games, and the 1968 Games in Mexico, with the famous Black Power salute by Tommie Smith and John Carlos. I chose these images because part of my argument is that these were two key Olympics for United States involvement. To begin with, the Olympic Charter states that no kind of demonstration of political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic sites, venues, or other areas. However, this has in fact never been the case in Olympic history, and there have been political issues throughout the Olympics as long as they've been going. And I'd also argue that the International Olympic Committee is a very important international organization that has played into some very important international politics. But to take a step back and look at the history, the Olympics are inherently a political event. They were founded by Baron de Coubertin, and part of his basis for the founding of the modern Olympics was to lessen or find a peaceful manner to deal with national aggressions. And I think that that speaks to the fact that the Olympics are definitely inherently political. Here's a graph of political protest in the Olympics going from 1896 to 2008. And as you can see, there are about three key peaks. More or less, political activism was really heightened by the multiple wars going on in the world. But the United States had key roles in the 1936 Olympics and then in the 1968 to 1980 peak. And in the 2000 peak, that had more to do with transnational politics than it did independent state-based politics. So my basic research questions were, what role did the Olympics play in international politics? What role has the United States played in Olympic politics? And how has our role in the Olympics affected our perception of the connection between sport and politics? These were kind of the basic research questions I started with early in my research, and I think that the most important thing I found here was that the IOC is a really important international institution, and there are associated politics. Which brings me to my brief overview. The first modern Olympics were held in 1896. First record of political activism was 1906, but the really key years in the United States were 1936, 1948, and 1968. These years followed the peaks of the graph of the total political activism in the Olympics, and I argue that there's a correlation between the United States involvement, specifically because of some key players in those early Olympics. One of those key players being Avery Brundage. He was president of the American Olympic Association, and he led the decision to have the United States attend the 1936 Berlin Games despite the Nazi regime. And he was more or less in cahoots with the IOC president, and he was next in line to join the IOC, which is why we went to the Olympics that year. And I think this is really important because it set a precedent about threatening to boycott, and it also showed that there were a lot of countries waiting to see if the United States was going to boycott. My paper goes further into depth about the 1968 Olympics and the 1980 boycott, but basically my rough conclusion before I finished my paper was that the modern Olympics have always been a political institution, and there has been a huge increase in activism. And there are very specific correlations associated with the 1936, 1968, and 1980 Olympic Games that show how the United States had a really key part in forming the modern Olympics, and how the United States also used the Olympics as a platform of international politics, even if it wasn't always successful.